We have two, as I said, incredible women sitting to the side of me. First is Kate Marvel, and she's here tonight to talk about her book, Human Nature, 9 Ways to Feel About Our Changing Planet. Right here, for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. Kate is a climate scientist and one of the premier science communicators working today. A former cosmologist, she received a PhD in theoretical physics from Cambridge University. She led the Climate Trends chapter in the US 5th National Climate Assessment, has given a TED Talk, appeared on Meet the Press, appeared with my current favorite host, Ezra Klein, on The Ezra Klein Show, and testified before US Congress. She's written for Scientific American, Nautilus Magazine, and the One Being Project. Kate currently lives in Brooklyn with her family. To my left is Aditi Mayer, a sustainability thought leader and storyteller working at the nexus of social and environmental justice in fashion. As a writer, photographer, creative director, and public speaker, her work examines inequities within global supply chains while amplifying narratives of resilience, heritage, and cultural preservation. She's the founder of the Artisan Archive, a storytelling and social impact agency weaving narratives of craft, climate, and culture. Mayer's advocacy began in 2014 while organizing within Los Angeles' garment industry. And she was inspired to mobilize for labor justice following the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh. In 2020, she was named a National Geographic Fulbright Digital Storytelling Fellow to explore India's farming and artisan textile industries, and she's collaborated with various academic institutions and cultural organizations, including the United Nations, the Global Fashion Agenda, the Center for Sustainable Fashion, and State of Fashion, to advance conversations and to train the next generation of advocates. As a writer and journalist, she's written for Vogue Business, British Vogue, Atmos, PBS, and more. And with that, I will let these incredible women take it away.
Can you all hear me? I need to shorten that bio. Watching you read that, I was like, oh my God. Thank you, it's way too long. Hi everyone, my name is Aditi Mayer. Hi, I am so excited to be in community with you all tonight and to be in conversation with you, Kate. As mentioned, fashion has always been my vehicle to understand social and environmental justice. And the reason I'm so excited for this conversation is because I think fashion for me has been the medium to understand all these different emotions. When I first got involved in this space, it came from a place of grief. And I think tonight I want us all to kind of reflect on our own origin stories of why we care about the climate. Maybe it was a moment of grief, of seeing how broken a system could be, or when climate change isn't a distant abstraction, but happening in your own home. Or maybe it's from a place of love and awe. So I know for me, the first 5 years of my career was addressing the beast of fast fashion, and the latter half has been about the awe-inspiring world of craft and culture. And I think that is actually a really sustainable way to, have longevity in these movements, is come from a place of love and awe. Now, all of these are emotions that you explore in your book, Kate. But before we jump into it, I want you to tell us a bit more about your lore. So you are a climate scientist at NASA, guys. This is really cool stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into this work?
Sure, yeah. So I actually did not start my career or my life wanting to be a scientist. I took science in high school, and I thought, oh my gosh, physics is so boring. I do not care about the ball rolling down an inclined plane. I cannot conceive of being the type of person who would care about the ball rolling down an inclined plane. And so I thought science was boring. And then in college, I took an astronomy class, just a general introduction, astronomy 101, and it blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, this is science? And everybody's like, yes, we have been trying to tell you that for a really long time. And it just opened my mind to science as a way of understanding the world, science as part of culture. And I have to say, I still do not care about balls rolling down inclined planes, but science is so much more than that. So I did my PhD in theoretical physics, because that's normal, and it was the study of everything, cosmology, the study of the entire universe. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to come up with a theory of everything. We were trying to understand everything ever in the entire universe. And as I progressed through school, I started realizing, you know what? Like, most of space is empty and it's cold and it wants to kill you. And all of the other planets that we know about are garbage. And really, the Earth is the only good planet. It is the only really interesting place in the entire cosmos. So I fell in love with Earth science, and that's where I've been ever since.
That's really cool. I think it's the idea of like going to space to fall in love with soil or the Earth, because you're like, wow, that is a very precious planet that we're living on. So in terms of your day-to-day work, you're often modeling potential futures where we have different climates, right? As we have a more and more hostile environment. Can you talk about that and how doing that work kind of led you and inspired you to write this book?
Sure, yeah. So I work a lot with climate models, which are essentially digital toy planets that live on a computer. And those are really useful because you can do experiments that you could never do in the real world. If I want to understand the impact of human beings on the climate, I kind of have two choices. I can ask everybody to go live on another planet for 800 years, or I can use the digital safety of a climate model to do that experiment, to simulate that. And so we can do wild things in climate models. We can set off volcanoes wherever we want. We can move the land around. We can make the world spin backwards if we want. And those are ways that we learn about the Earth that we live on. So a climate model is just everything we know about the Earth written down in physics and translated to code. And we use these to look at worlds that might have been, to do these counterfactuals, to look at worlds that were, so understand the Earth's past climates, but also to understand where it is that we might be going. And where that led me to this book is the fact that I see catastrophic things every day, like several times a day. And I see them in the climate models because it is very easy to do something terrible to the Earth within a model. But then I realized, oh my gosh, climate change isn't just happening in a model. Climate change is happening here. It's happening to us. It's happening to this planet. And everybody and everything that I care about lives on this planet. And I had feelings about that. And that was a really awkward, uncomfortable place for me to be because scientists are not supposed to have feelings. We are supposed to be objective and we're supposed to be neutral. And I was worried that, oh my gosh, what is this going to do to my credibility to kind of come out as a human being? And then I realized that, you know what, like, I don't think it makes us more credible when we pretend we don't have any feelings. It makes us liars. And I realized that I didn't want to be a liar.
Okay, so that is really powerful. So I went to school for journalism, and very similar to the whole, like, scientists have to be objective, there is a very similar school of thought that journalists also have to be objective, and creating this binary between the objective and the subjective. And for me, when I think about my own arc, a lot of it started from a place of inquiry through journalism and reporting about something, but then there was like a moment where you're like, oh, I'm a human being and I'm having a response to this. And I think as a world, where I would like us to go is not just objectivity versus subjectivity, but rather a politics of transparency. This is where I'm coming from. So is that like a similar path that you've been on, is like, let's unpack what these emotions are?
I totally agree. And I think journalism and science, like, we're trying to do the exact same thing, just at different timescales, right? We're trying to find out what's true and we're trying to tell people about it. And both of those activities are done by human beings, right? As you said, both of these things lead you to have an emotional response to what you are seeing or experiencing, because both of these things happen on planet Earth. And I do think that it's important to acknowledge and name and talk about our feelings, both for the sake of honesty and transparency, but also because it helps us connect with other people, right? If you come across as a science robot, if you come across as a journalist robot, nobody's going to want to talk to you because they're going to be like, that's weird, and also you don't seem very interesting. And I think leveraging these feelings, saying that, oh, we can experience emotion is a good way to connect with people because everybody is experiencing things like this.
Yeah, and we contextualize that in a climate week right now, right? Where we're in our own spaces. It could be fashion, it could be the UN, it could be NASA. But I think one thing that I see is the golden question of our time is how do you get people to act? And on one hand, you can argue that we've had the science, the data around for decades telling us what is going on. But often what mobilizes people, from what I've noticed, is when you are contextualizing that in their body or their childhood or maybe ancestral memory. So there's all these little things that when we are approaching it from a heart-centered space, not to sound like anti-science, but there is this balance that we need to achieve of science and feelings are not at odds, which brings us to this book. You go through 9 emotions, right? So can you tell us what those different emotions are and what was the journey in writing this book?
Sure, yeah. One of the reasons that I wanted to write this book is I wanted to explore different emotions. I feel like we're kind of impoverished in the way that we talk about climate change, where we try to force this entire world, everything that is changing, into a single emotional response. We tell people, you must feel ashamed, you must feel angry, you must feel afraid, you must feel grieving. And of course, we all feel all of those things, but it's possible and necessary to feel other things as well. I felt very strongly about starting this book with wonder, because climate science, yes, it shows us scary things, devastating things, but it's still science. And that means it is my job to go to work every day and find out something new about the world. And I am in awe of this planet. I feel like people don't really understand how unbelievably amazing this is, right? People say, oh, we'll just move to Mars. Do you know how boring Mars is? Like, it's terrible. The people who say they're going to move to Mars, they won't even go to New Jersey, right? They're not going to move to Mars. And I wanted to share that with people. I wanted to share that we know why the temperature is changing, yes, but we know why it's changing because we know why the Earth has a temperature at all, right? Most of the energy, 99.999% of the energy on Earth comes from, guess where? The sun. But the thing that blows my mind is that the sun, this powerful star, is not warm enough to support life. So if the sun were all there was warming the Earth, our temperature would be well below freezing, and none of us would exist. And the thing is, we exist only because the sky does. So naturally occurring greenhouse gases, which trap heat, they make up less than 1/3% of the atmosphere. And they are so powerful that they are able to raise the temperature from well below freezing to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so these things are so sparse but so powerful. Imagine what happens when you increase their concentrations by 50%. But I felt very strongly about starting in that place of wonder because that is where I try to start every day. And then I wanted to go on a journey in the book. So we do go from wonder to anger, which I'm going to be frank with you, was the easiest chapter to write. And then guilt and fear and grief, but also pride and surprise and hope. And I wanted to end with love because I think that is the strongest emotion that I feel when I think about the imperative to act, the imperative to do something about climate change. We should do something not because the science tells us we need to, not because we feel guilted or shamed into it, but because this is affecting the things and the people that we love. And that's a motivation that I think we all have.
What was the most difficult emotion to write about?
Ooh, I really struggled writing about fear because that is generally the way that we talk about climate change, right? We try to scare the bejesus out of everybody, and we should be scared. It is very scary. But I wanted to talk about it in a new way, in a way that you haven't seen before when you read the news. And what I realized is when I examined the things that I was afraid of, at first I was just thinking about the things that physics tells me to be afraid of, right? When it gets warmer, that means we get more and longer and more severe heat waves. It means that because hot air holds more water vapor, we're seeing more severe downpours, which lead to floods. Hot air is thirstier air, so that also means more droughts at the same time. Warm water is hurricane food, so we expect to see stronger storms. warm water expands and warm ice melts. So we expect sea levels to rise. And all of those are scary. But I realized actually the thing that scares me the most is the human response. Because again, climate change doesn't happen in a computer model. Climate change happens in the world that we make for it. It happens with the structures that exist that we have built. It magnifies existing inequalities, existing things that are unfair. And then I realized, oh my gosh, the thing that worries me, that frightens me the most about climate change is not what it's going to do to us. It's what it's going to make us do to each other.
That is really powerful. And I think one thing you mentioned earlier is a lot of your work is not only looking to the future, but also looking to the past, right? Of how the temperature has changed, how the planet has changed. But I think what's really interesting is that your book actually takes a look at culture and myth. And in doing that, you're kind of looking at history to see how, societies have responded to uncertainty, how they have responded in the face of fear. So are there any stories that you can share in the process of writing and researching this book where the role of myth and cultures around the world can almost serve as a blueprint or a reference point?
I've got two things, I think. One that should definitely not serve as a blueprint. And you've set me off now because I am obsessed with volcanoes. And now I'm going to tell you about what happens when volcanoes go off. So there are certain types of volcano, usually located near the tropics, usually very powerful eruptions, that can actually squirt so much gas and dust up into the stratosphere that they block the sun. And there is a pretty pronounced cooling effect as a result. This most recently happened in 1991 when Mount Pinatubo went off and the world became about 0.5 degrees Celsius colder. But in the 1600s, just kind of by random chance, there was a series of volcanic eruptions that went off and made the weather cooler than usual, and is called in Northern Europe the Little Ice Age. And what we see in the historical record at this time is a real spike in the number of people who are being accused of witchcraft, especially women. And if you look at what the witches are being accused of doing, it's messing with the weather. It's causing storms. It's killing livestock. It's killing crops. And the connection, I think, to some of the real formative stories of our culture is that in Scotland, which was really hit hard by these conditions, they had a king, James VI, real weirdo, really obsessed with witchcraft, detecting witches, punishing witches. He's actually the only member of the British royal family to ever write a peer-reviewed scientific paper, which was about witches. Science was different back then. And when Elizabeth I died, he came down and he became king of England as well. So if you were a playwright in the early 1600s in England, and the new king was Scottish, obsessed with his ancestry, and really into witches, what would you write? Macbeth. So I am not saying that climate change is going to cause witch hunting. I am not saying that climate change is going to lead to classic works of English literature. But what I am saying is that that's what matters. The fact that climate change affects human beings, the fact that climate change happens to us, I think that is both what matters the most and what I, as a physicist, am not really equipped to understand. I need tools outside of just science in order to process that. So yeah, we should not do that.
That's so powerful because we always look at climate change as something we look out to, right? Something we bear witness to. But I think what's so powerful about your book is that it kind of forces us to turn the gaze back inward and, present this existential question of how will I respond in this moment? And as we know, climate change is not this random theory that's, going to come one day. We're living through it. So it means we're all actively processing a complex set of emotions currently. So how do you think with this current political moment in time, with the environmental context that we're living in, how does one process the emotions that are at, in our body in this moment? How do you do that?
Very badly. I think I have to be really careful not to present myself as any sort of expert on emotions. I know nothing about emotions other than having them. And so I can't offer any sort of guide for how to be. All I can say is that I find myself kind of doubling down on solutions, on hope, in kind of a defiant way, right? I think there is a space for defiant hope right now because the facts of the matter have not changed, no matter what people say about it. The fact is that climate change is not an asteroid hurtling toward us. It's not a mysterious phenomenon we don't understand. Because imagine how much scarier it would be if it was. We know exactly what is causing climate change, and we know exactly how we can stop it. And those things remain true. A lot of times people love to ask me, I'm sure people love to ask you this, right? What gives you hope? And my answer is kind of, I don't know. Because for me, that's the wrong question. It's like asking, oh, do you have hope you can clean the bathroom? Like, I don't know. That's a weird question. Just clean the bathroom. You know what to do. And I think when it comes to climate change, we know what to do. We have the solutions. And so that reality, hanging on to that, motivates me and it makes me angry. But angry in a productive and I think generative way.
Yeah, and I think it brings us to this idea of alchemizing this emotion, right? I think for me, we often talk about this binary of objectivity and subjectivity, and also this binary between love and grief. But for me, I think those two things are so deeply interconnected. We grieve because we love so deeply. And I actually think that if we alchemize that as a society, that is the biggest driver for climate action. I'll never forget being at this conference once, and there's a lot of jargon and data going around, but someone once told us, close your eyes and think about this world in 50 years, but thinking about not only the world, but your loved ones. Who are you fighting to protect? And I think that is one of the most important reframes of why we do this work. Not only the context we're operating in, but what drives us. So, what takeaways do you have for the audience? Not only not as an expert in how to alchemize these emotions, but where do we go from here for folks that are looking for a call to action in this moment in time?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I hated that question, right? People would ask me, what can I do about climate change? And I'm like, I don't know, it's just my job to complain about it. And then I kind of experimented with other answers, like, I don't know, vote. And then, it became, don't vote for people who don't get it and organize for people who do, which still remains true. But I think for a long time, there's been this real tension, right, between, oh my gosh, is this an individual problem? Is this a system problem? And that can be really demotivating, where people think, oh my gosh, I can't address this problem unless I am the president of the United States. And I don't know all of you, but any one of you would probably be better at being the president of the United States. So if that is a possibility, please make it so I will vote for you. But that feels really demotivating. But it also feels demotivating to think, oh my gosh, I can't do anything unless I drive my own personal carbon footprint to zero. And oh my gosh, I can't because I'm embedded in this society and there's no way I can do that. First of all, do you guys know who invented the concept of the personal carbon footprint? It was BP. British Petroleum. It was a campaign to try to shift responsibility to the individual consumer as opposed to company, which would dictate regulation and all those terrible, terrible things. But if you think about that, that is actually the superpower. The fact that I can't drive my personal carbon footprint to zero because I'm embedded in a society. And that means you're not an individual. Nobody's an individual. We are all part of communities. We're part of faith communities or school communities or neighborhoods or workplaces. And I think thinking about yourself as an interconnected member of communities is really the way that you can start to think about getting traction on climate solutions. Most of us have workplaces, and you know what? It doesn't matter if you have sustainability or environment in your title. If you have a job and your job's on planet Earth, congratulations, you have a climate job. And so I think thinking of ourselves as members of communities and knowing that there is so much that can be done is, I think, very, very empowering.
I love that. And I want to go back to something you said. This is a very random thought, but you talked about witches being women who were seen as changing the weather, right? So the witches of our time are the fossil fuel industry.
Yes, burn them.
So the Salem witch trials of our time could be against big oil. Some food for thought. Kate, I would love if you can share and actually read a portion of your book to the audience. I think you shared so much, and it'd be so great for us to hear the snippet from the book.
Sure. So this is from the first chapter, the Wonder chapter. And this kind of deals with the myth of Cassandra. So the myth of Cassandra, she was a priestess of Troy, and she was cursed by Apollo for some reason. Who cares? All the gods are assholes. I don't know what she did. But her curse was terrible because she was given the gift of prophecy, and she would always see the future, and she would always be right. But the curse was that nobody would ever believe her. So I'll start here. There's an obvious comparison between the mythical Cassandra and modern-day climate scientists like me. We see the tragedy that awaits, we try to warn of it. There have been 6 comprehensive climate reports commissioned by the United Nations. There have been 5 U.S. national climate assessments. Over and over, we work, unpaid, on these things, and when they are released, the news coverage is the same. Scientists concerned about global warming, scientists worried about ice sheets, scientists alarmed by rise in emissions. As if this were a private worry for the scientists, as if everyone else lives on a different planet. And then in the aftermath, nothing happens, at least nothing commensurate with the scale of the problem. This is our curse, to shout unheard into the void, to make predictions that can't help but come true, to warn and warn and warn again until the entire world is engulfed in needless, predictable flames. But here's a tiny bit of magic. Our curse is also our gift. The models we use to predict danger and doom also show us amazement and beauty and joy. It's a wonderful thing to watch the future unfold before you, to filter the world through elegant equations until it gives you something that looks an awful lot like prophecy. But to understand the future of the planet, you must understand its present, the hot tropics and freezing poles, the climb of wet air over a damp mountainside, the gentle breeze blowing in from the sea on a hot day. You must sit there for a while, waiting for the world to show you its beautiful and terrible secrets, listening to the now for the faint echoes of futures to come. The gravity that pulls the tired autumn leaves to the ground is the same force that hurls the world around the sun. The motion of every falling leaf a hard promise that spring will come again. It is a gift to be alive, to be able to notice things. We scientists are among the luckiest creatures on Earth. We're allowed to know. Like Cassandra, we see. But the point is not just that Cassandra was ignored. It's that she was right.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm going to open it up to Q&A in a second, but I just want to say your book for me was so powerful because, again, it showed me how the past, the present, and the future can be in conversation. And I think that's something that is applicable to every single industry, whether it's fashion, whether it's climate science, right? I think looking to the past, to the power of myth and culture gives us a way of understanding human nature. And again, going beyond these binaries is another big takeaway for me in your book. Love and grief can and will coexist. Let's alchemize it. Science, objectivity, and feelings and subjectivity, these are both essential to understand where we are and where we're going to go going forward. So, with that said, I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if there's any questions, let us know. Yes.
Yeah, so if you look at how we are managing climate change right now, it is 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer now than it was before the Industrial Revolution. So climate change is already here. And if you look at who is suffering the most from climate change, it is not the comfortable. It is not the wealthy. It is not the people who are disproportionately causing climate change. It's people in what are called frontline communities, people who don't have access to shade or cooling, people who don't have access to high ground when the seas rise. And that is a really uncomfortable place for me to be as a physicist, because I am used to studying things that behave themselves, right? You know, a water droplet or a molecule of air, it's always going to do the same thing in response to the same forces, right? F equals ma. If I push this, this glass, I know what will happen to it. I know it will fall off the table. But if I push Aditi, I don't know what she's going to do, right? And that is a very uncomfortable place for a physicist to be, because it is the limits of our knowledge, right? Science can only take us so far. And that doesn't mean science is not vitally important. But science is describing the world that humans have made. And it is the culmination of years of policy decisions, of history, of current decisions. And I think because climate change is affecting the entire planet, we need to understand how is it affecting the entire planet, so much of which we have built. I mean, I would definitely say love. Not to be soppy about it, but I have 2 kids, and my kids are very hard to ignore. They're very loud, and so it's I have a reminder, a constant reminder that I love the future. I have to. A constant reminder that I am sending these kids to live on an alien planet, on a world that's going to be unrecognizable. And a reminder that that is why I care. You know, this is a great planet. It is wonderful. But without all of us, it's just a rock. It's a really pretty rock. It's the best rock there is. But we're the ones who make meaning on the rock. And so I do carry that with me. I think the social science research actually does show that love is one of the most powerful motivators for climate action. Turns out that when you go up to people and you say, climate change is all your fault because you're terrible and also stupid, they're not going to be like, I want to hear more from this person. But if you can appeal to the reason that people care about anything, then you have you can start a conversation, and you have common ground from which to talk about solutions.
Any other questions? Did you have a question?
I have 1,000 questions. I'm really interested in the way that you are a science communicator, which I know is in your bio, but in the way that I'm not sure if I'm going to formulate this into a coherent question, but to the point that you just made about how to connect with people and how not, or what fails to create connection. Have you seen anything recently this week or over the last few months that you think is helping to create more connections around raising climate awareness, particularly at a time where it's very hard to talk about things without just furthering division? And if so, kind of what have you seen that we should be looking to, reading, listening to, and then what kind of are you getting your further education and inspiration from?
I actually think that's a great question, maybe for both of us. And so I want to hear from you first, maybe while I think of my answer.
Putting me on the spot. The question was like, what are we consuming right now, or what are we seeing that is like allowing communities to come together?
And kind of continue to open or
Yeah.
open new lines of communication, specifically around the topic of climate change.
Yeah, for me, I think it always goes back to the Trojan horse approach. And that's why I think fashion has been my chosen medium, right? So, as someone who is between Gen Z and millennial, I have seen the power of like the internet to bring pretty neat, what we'd consider niche communities together. And so when I was coming out of high school into college, I was like, okay, Instagram is this new thing. I remember seeing how there was like the fashion bloggers contingent, and suddenly there was this huge factory collapse in Bangladesh, and it felt like there was such a discord between conversations of human rights and social justice and the fashion world. But I think that similar to what you said, like if we're saying, oh, like, we created climate change and we're all going to die, or like, why are you buying this? Instead of approaching things from a place of shame, if we can kind of reroute the conversation to be about, look at this pretty dress, let's talk about how it was made, or let's talk about the cosmology of the cultures that, created a certain motif, certain craft practice. That is such a beautiful way to allow people to see themselves in a conversation. Yes, it's fashion, but it's about culture, about craft, about ancestral identity. Those are just some examples. And so I think that, a garment is just an example of how something has a much deeper story. And if we can appeal to that, we are talking about climate in that context, but it becomes more relational. And I think community care is something you mentioned, but how do we bring the relational back into any story that we want to tell? And right now, you're right, we're living in times of deep, deep division. And a question that I have to ask myself is, am I appealing only to those that have the same political silo or thought process that I do? How do you actually extend beyond the aisle, right? And so really breaking it down to like the human needs that everyone is just looking to provide for their families. There is a fight for shelter, for home. And if we could appeal to those like common denominators, that is really powerful. But sometimes there is a specificity of language we use in certain spaces that make people feel alienated. So that's something that I'm thinking about. It's not an answer or a conclusion I've come to, but how do we make it more universal, I guess?
Yeah, I've decided that I'm cranky with the concept of a science communicator. And that's because historically we scientists have been very bad at talking about what we do. We're like, we made a graph. You don't like the graph? We made another graph. There's several equations. What if we gave you more equations? Would you believe us now? And we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's not working. But if you look at the things that move people, if you look at the things that work, like we don't call Shakespeare a witch communicator, right? He's just a writer. He's a storyteller. And I think leaning into the power of stories, realizing that we have a way to move people, it's just not the way that we have been using for a long time. We all respond to narrative. We all respond to stories. And I have been really heartened to see the people who tell stories for a living, the people who are really good at it, getting in on the act of talking about climate change. Because what on earth is more interesting that's happening right now? And it's been really hard to kind of get a finger on it, right? Because it's so big, it's so abstract, it feels so overwhelming. But that's also what makes it such an amazing source of stories. So that is inspiring me right now, the fact that we're starting to figure out new ways to talk about it. One thing that I will say is, I was talking to a political scientist who told me the word for this. I forget what it was. It was a very long academic jargony word, but I'll just call it a thing. If you look at the polling data, even in the United States, the vast majority of people actually say, I am concerned about climate change and I would like for the government to act on it. But the other really striking thing that comes out of the polling data is people think, oh, nobody else feels this way. They vastly underestimate the proportion of people who want action on climate change. And that's a problem because that makes you feel very lonely. That makes you feel very isolated. You're not very empowered when you think that you are the only one. And so that's why one of the most powerful things we can do when it comes to climate change is we can talk about it. And I think we are finding new ways to talk about it in a way that I find really exciting and hopeful.
Yeah, that actually reminds me at the beginning of this year, I live in LA and we had the fires. And as depressing and intense as that time was, never in my life, as someone who was born and raised there, have I seen neighborhoods go door to door, learn each other's name. Because when push comes to shove, there's a fire or there is a power outage, your neighbor is the person you're going to have to go to, right? So I think all roads kind of lead back to community and that like relational building element. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Kate.
Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause for Aditi?
Thank you, thank you. We are going to have some time now. So Kate, you're going to sign some books. We're going to have a book signing.
I'm around. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to, I guess, move to the back of the room. There are books available. And if you want to be in conversation with Kate and I, we are around. But thank you all so much for coming.
Thank
Another
you.
round of applause for you all being here.